Greetings and salutations, everyone. This is, of course, Ricky Levon, and this particular video broadcast is about the golden image. Now, these are the stories 9 through 12. 9, 10, 11, 12. Yes, 9 through 12. There's 13 stories. This is 9 through 12. Now, the interesting thing about this particular group of stories is that this is a little bit more of your action. When you're reading the book itself, you can kind of tell that it's building up to something. That was kind of the idea in the placement of each one of the stories. It's like you want to be able to learn a little bit more about the town as you progress through the book. After all, even though they are individual stories, you still want to be able to feel like you're being told this story, that you're getting immersed in the town of Sheridan Falls. Now, these last four were a little bit tough, but I loved writing them. They're a little bit more of how I write, and you'll understand if you read the other video blogs on the other stuff that I write. It tends to be a little more thorough, a little bit more of an interesting version. Now, because this was a little more for young people, families, and for anyone else, I had to kind of make sure that it's kind of tailored towards that, but still be able to have some interesting and exciting stuff. However, I digress. Now, these particular stories, like I said, a little bit more action, a little bit more into it. Really like writing this part. So when you get through the first eight, then you'll be like, okay, I'm really seeing where this is going, and then you're gonna read these four and be like, oh my goodness, what is going on? For example, the next story is called The Voice Within. That's the 9th story within the book. The Voice Within basically deals with a young man who hears a message from the Lord and has to relay that. He's at summer camp, he's kind of confused, but he definitely hears a message from the Lord and how he has to relay that. There's something that goes on in that story that's very important, and it shows up later in a different story. But like I said, really pay attention to that one. That's one of those other stories where pay attention to what goes on there. Now, also, Intuition is another story. This is about a group of people who's actually away from Sheridan Falls. This story, and there's only one other one, where the bulk of the story, a big portion of the story, actually happens away from the city. For the most part, the far majority of the book actually happens there. Now, the citizens, the people are from Sheridan Falls, but this actually happens outside of Sheridan Falls, and how they go through an avalanche. No lie, that was fun to write, but there's an avalanche that happens, and how they are saved by a young man who shows up to be able to save them. Now, the other story is Obsidian. This is by far, outside of the last book, outside the last story, this is by far one of the hardest ones I actually had to write. The reason why is because this story is about a preacher who has to deal with the fact that one of his parishioners' son is possibly possessed. That's right, I said it, is possibly possessed. That is because in the Bible that this story comes from, the kid itself in the Bible was the possessed child. So that's where this story basically comes from. Now, dealing with that, of course, when you're dealing with a story that has to deal with families and themes, you have to make sure that this book can be picked up by a middle schooler and be completely fine, as well as someone who's grown. You can't really dive into the story as though you're talking about, like, what was it, the Conjuring or Insidious or something like that. You can't go that deep into the story. That's a little bit much. You're not trying to do Stephen King. I mean, it'd be kind of weird to have, oh, nice happy thought, oh, nice happy thought, and then horror story. No, that won't work. So, because of that, this story is written in such a way, don't worry, family and people, it's written in such a way where you're like, oh, okay, you can kind of tell the child is a little off, a little messed up, something's going on, but how the pastor has to be able to deal with that, and basically what happens there. Now, that story is called Obsidian. And the 12th story, before you get to the main one, is called Versus. This story is basically like your David versus Goliath. There's a bully, there's a guy who doesn't like the bully, boom, clash. That's basically what that story is all about. So those are those stories. That is stories 9 through 12. And if you check online, you should be able to see Golden Image stories on books 1 through 4, 5 through 8. This is 9 through 12, and there should be one on the actual last story called The Golden Image, from which this title comes from. Make sure you pick this up a copy of yourself today. Anywhere, Amazon, everywhere the books are sold, you can definitely pick yourself up a copy. Thanks. Have a great time. Remember, live life, but don't do anything you regret for it.